This is a short session on articles submissions to the Modern Law Review. This session is intended to complement the 2020 panel session on submissions for women, which is available on YouTube. And that covered all of the journal sections. Today's video is intended to share some thoughts about what the Modern Law Review is looking for in article submissions and to address some FAQs about articles for those who are considering submitting. So I'm here with Jo Braithwaite and Vanessa Munro, who are two of our committee members, and we'll just be running through some short questions. So Jo, as a former articles editor, can you talk us through the process of submission and publication?
Sure, thanks, Tatiana. So the Modern Law Review uses the Scholar One system, which authors will be likely to be familiar with from other journals. The key point is that it's a double-blind review process. One feature to be aware of is that in articles, there's sort of a double review process to make sure that the submissions are dealt with as robustly as possible. So on first submission, the submission will be anonymized, and on an anonymous basis, it'll be desk reviewed, as we call it, by a member of the committee with expertise in the particular subject area. So that is taken away from the articles editor and given to a committee member with special expertise. So on the basis of a desk review, that this is the initial review, articles will either be rejected at that stage as unsuitable for publication in the journal, or they'll proceed back to the articles editor and then put out to peer review, which is again anonymous, usually using two, sometimes some circumstances, three anonymous peer reviewers. So that's sort of good background to have and hopefully reassuring. I'd emphasize the anonymity and the robustness of that process. I'd also emphasize that the process is designed to give good feedback to authors, whether an article is makes it to desk review stage or beyond. And there will be feedback given back to the article at both of those stages. And the outcomes that obviously at peer review are as per journals normally, so it could be rejected after peer review, designated for revise and resubmit, or accepted for publication at that stage.
Great, thanks so much, Jo. And Vanessa, perhaps you can speak to the sort of work that's published by the Modern Law Review.
Sure. Well, I guess, if you look at back issues of the journal, it gives you a good indication of this, that it's a journal with a very wide international readership. It's a general journal. So from that point of view, we're interested in publishing a very diverse range of work. And you can see that if you look through some of those back issues. So we're interested in more doctrinal kind of approaches, also more conceptual and theoretical analyses, but also empirical grounded socio-legal work, whether that's qualitative or quantitative, easy to say, or mixed methods, combination of both of those. So I think that, the message there is really to be appreciative of the fact that we're open to lots of different types of scholarship, and not to feel like there's a particular type that's privileged over any others, because as an editorial board, we're actually very committed to a wide range of approaches being showcased in the journal.
Great, and perhaps you'd both like to make some comments about what we're looking for in terms of the substantive content or quality.
Thanks, Tatiana. So if I could jump in, I guess the first thing to be aware of for authors, and I guess another aim of the initiative today is to sort of encourage new authors to submit to the journal. So that's really important to us. It is highly competitive, both in terms of the volume of submissions, and if you think about the journal coming out 6 times a year, with sort of a limited number of articles per issue. It is going to be highly competitive just purely on numbers terms, but also in terms of the rigorous review process. So that, I guess, that needs to come up front. But we do want to sort of encourage new authors to submit. And with that in mind, it's worth spending some time immersing themselves in recent issues of the journal and having a look and reflecting on the work that is published. And hopefully what comes through, apart from what Vanessa's just said about the diversity of types of scholarship, is that the articles that we publish are making an original and an important contribution to the scholarship. So there is new arguments, new research, new analysis being put forward in each and every one of the articles, that there's a robustness in the argument and in the analysis, so it's going to stand up in its own terms. It's presenting robust underlying research, and the articles are going to benefit from real clarity of writing, clear presentation of the argument, and they're going to appeal to a broad scholarly legal audience. So one thing to bear in mind, and maybe we'll come back to this in a minute, but one thing to bear in mind is to be, if you are presenting work that's specialist in sense that you're contributing to a particular field, to explain to the general readership why it's important, why it's significant. So striking that balance between depth of the argument and contributing to your field in law, and explaining the relevance to the general audience, general scholarly audience, is challenging, and it's something that I think authors do need to sort of bear in mind when they're preparing a piece for submission.
I don't really have an awful lot to add to that, I don't think, other than to sort of underscore that sense that what we're looking for are ambitious pieces that do kind of shift frames of thinking or add something really novel or original to the debates, and that do address that kind of why should the generalist reader care question, which involves underscoring to the reader why it's a really important contribution, but also thinking about the balance that you strike in terms of what you take for granted that your reader will and will not know about existing debates, and how to kind of set up your discussion in a way that appeals to people who might not be grounded in those debates, but also those people who are more grounded in it can really see why it's an important and original contribution that takes debate forward.
So I think we've touched on this a little bit, but what would be a reason for an article failing to make it past the threshold?
I think it's hard to sort of generalize, but there are some points maybe at desk review that would be interesting to sort of raise. And sometimes at desk review we come across pieces that really clearly haven't been written with the MLR in mind. They're far too long or far too short. They might be expressly aimed at practitioners, in a very practical sense, with sort of bullet points, for example, or really broken down in a different way that would work well in another journal, but they clearly haven't been written with this particular journal in mind. And coming back to my point about specialist versus generalist, that there might be articles that are extremely specific and narrow and maybe technical, where that work hasn't been done to explain the relevance and the contribution to the general audience. So that's sort of desk review. Vanessa, I don't know if you want to speak more about the sort of the peer review, sort of some common themes in peer review feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things there, building on what you're saying, Jo, is just that sense of, I think because it's a generalist journal, what sometimes happens is pieces spend too long setting out that scene, and so they kind of leave the more robust original contributions till too late in the article, when you don't actually have a huge amount of space. So I think that one of the things that's really important there is working on that balance before submission, so that the peer reviewers can see very clearly from very early on what's the significant and the original contribution in the piece, and aren't having to kind of work their way right through towards the end to get that. And that's, I think, one of the things where, asking other people to look at your work and read your work and have that kind of informal peer review before it goes through the formal journal review process can be tremendously helpful. And asking people outside of your immediate discipline is also really key there, because they are the people who will often not be doing the peer review, but they are the people who will often be reading the piece at the end of the process, that peer reviewers will also have in mind when they're looking at it.
Yeah. But just to jump in, please don't send the articles on a speculative basis, i.e. outside of Scholar One, to the articles editors at the time. sometimes occasionally you get messages saying, you know, how does this look? Which obviously compromises the anonymity of the peer review, but of the review process, but it also isn't something that the article's editors can engage with, just given the volume. But subject to that caveat, it's so important to show or present your work. And just to add to Vanessa's point, I mean, the introduction is so key. The first sort of section of the article is so key to flag up that contribution and how it's going to be presented and how it's going to be argued in the piece, and to make sure that first section isn't simply a long section setting out maybe facts of a case or a literature review, but rather upfront to be very clear what your contribution is going to be. So that whole question of balance in the article is very important.
Great. So what then are your top tips or main take homes for authors who are considering an article submission?
So I guess what I found really useful and still do is to, when I'm targeting a particular journal, whether it's the MLR or another journal, to spend some time immersing myself in that journal and to think about the kind of work that journal publishes, and also how other articles have struck that balance that we've talked about. To really read around, and just this particular edition of the MLR up on the website right now, there's a whole range of articles just in this kind of latest issue. So to immerse yourself in those and to think about, you know, how each of those, whether it's in your area or not, has met the sort of types of criteria we've been talking about, including making a contribution.
Vanessa, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I think all of that's excellent advice, and I think the other thing is just kind of to not feel put off by the fact that, you know, everyone says, oh, in the Modern Law Review, there's a lot of submissions, it's hard to get in. I mean, it is a competitive journal, but you have to be in it to win it. So once you've done the thinking about the journal, is it a good fit, crafting it in a way that you feel hits the mark in terms of the readership, having comments from people and really got it into the best shape that you feel that it can get in, do submit it. Because as an editorial board and with our peer reviewers, we are very keen to make sure that even if the piece isn't accepted, that you will get really useful feedback that you can then use for working the article to submit somewhere else. So it's a worthwhile process, even if ultimately it doesn't end up making it into the journal. So I think that'd probably be my other thing to say.
Yep. Yeah.
Jo, anything else?
I think that you know, to realize it's competitive, but not to be put off, as Vanessa said, but to take time over making your submission as robust as possible. And you know, somebody once gave me the advice that, you know, you write something, you put it away for a bit and come back to it. And I think that's quite helpful, because it's hard as an author to look at your work from multiple perspectives. So whereas, you know, you may be very, you know, rightly focused on the robustness of the underlying research, to put it away and come back to it perhaps with fresh eyes, you can see that you could make it clearer perhaps, or you could make the introduction punchier. So I would try, if possible, to take your time over finalizing a submission, and obviously that will also allow you to get comments and perhaps present it, but not to rush it. But at the same time, really would encourage new authors to think about submitting, and alongside the panel that we did back in 2020, hopefully this video and these thoughts will help people consider making a submission.
We really would encourage you to go and take a look at that video if you have the time, because as we said at the start, it does cover the other sections as well as the article section. But really the key message here is, please do consider submitting. Don't be put off by how competitive it is, as we've discussed, or by preconceptions about scope. At the same time, again, take your time and make it as robust as you can. I hope some of this has been useful, and we look forward to receiving your submissions in future.